Talking about legacy, and I want to begin a series entitled Winning at What Matters Most. And that's really talking about how you can build a legacy of love and fulfillment in your relationships. And so I want to begin to give you some keys as we go through this series on relational success. And so in that vein, I got a joke for you this morning, okay? So there was a man celebrating his 75th birthday, and so all the people came for the party, and they had a great time, and they were just amazed. This man seemed to be so healthy and fit, and they said, man, what is your secret to success? How are you so healthy and fit and seemingly vibrant and full of life at 75 years old? And he said, well, I tell you, the secret to my success is I get up and I walk every day, rain or shine. I get out in the outdoors, some fresh air, and take a walk every day. And I've been doing that for the past 50 years. And they said, wow, that's incredible to have such discipline that every day you get up and walk and exercise for 50 years. How did you develop such a routine of discipline to do that every day for 50 years? And he said, well, I'll tell you, the day my wife and I got married, we made a solemn pact that anytime we argued, whoever was proven wrong had to go outside and take a walk. I've been walking every day since then. So there you go. There's your joke for the day, all right? Yeah. All right, we're talking about winning where it matters most. And again, we're talking about how to have relational success in your life. And so today I want to talk about how to be successful in your role in your family relationships. So today I'm going to be primarily talking to the men. Ladies, y'all okay for today, okay? But this applies to you ladies as well, because hopefully you'll get some few nuggets here that you can apply in raising your sons and your grandsons and encouraging the young men in your life of who God has called them to be and embracing God's role and purpose for their lives. And so I want to begin this morning reading from 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. It says, when the time drew near for David to die, this is King David, he gave a charge to Solomon, his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go. How many of you guys this morning would like to prosper in all you do and wherever you go? Well, I'm going to give you some keys to doing that this morning, particularly prospering in your family relationships. And so the first thing I want you to see, the first command that David gives Solomon is he tells him, be strong. Guys, if you are going to win where it matters most, if you are going to win in your relationship with your wife, if you're going to win in your relationship with your children, if you're going to win in the role God has called you to play in our world and in our society, you must embrace being strong. You must embrace being strong. And I understand when I say this, there are all kind of alarms and bells going off in your mind because what I'm saying this morning is not politically correct, and I don't care. It is biblically correct. It is God's way of living life as a man. God has called you and created you to be strong. Now, nature tells you this. Look at the physical design God has given a man's body. A man, on average, is 50 to 100% stronger than the average woman. It is much easier for a man to put on muscle mass than it is a woman. And God has designed a man that way because God created a man to be strong. And guys, if you don't hear anything else I say today, I want you to walk away with your chest puffed out this morning. I want you to walk away with a new confidence. God has created you to be strong. And you should not apologize for it. You should not be embarrassed by it. You should not back down from it. You should not allow yourself to be talked out of it. God has created you to be strong. And there are people in your life, particularly your loved ones, who need the strength that you bring to those relationships. And without it, they're going to struggle and feel frustrated in relating to you, and you're not going to see the fulfillment in your relationships that you hope for unless you embrace what it means to be strong. That charge that David gave Solomon, the very first words he says, Solomon, you're going to be the next king, and you have to be strong. A weak king gets assassinated, he gets sidelined, other people fill the vacuum of power. If you're going to be a king that I can be proud of, a son I can be proud of, you must be strong. You must embrace what it means to be a strong man. Look at the scripture here in the book of Proverbs. And of course, it's Solomon writing this years later. And he says, the glory of young men is their strength. Say that with me. The glory of young men is their strength. And the splendor of old men is their gray hair or their gray head. So what defines a young man is his strength, right? They're in the gym lifting weights, or they're running marathons, or doing triathlons. They're constantly pushing themselves and challenging themselves physically because the glory of a young man is his strength. It is the thing that defines him. It is the thing that he naturally gravitates toward, is strength. It is who God created him to be. Now, when I talk about strength, I'm not necessarily just talking about physical strength. But God has called men and created men to be strong. And it says the glory of a young man is his strength. It's the thing that defines him. And the splendor of all men is their gray head. And I'm kind of on the line here, y'all, I'm kind of 50-50 up top here. And I kind of, between my normal natural color and gray, I'm crossing that line. But gray hair symbolizes wisdom. And what that speaks to us about is the gray hair on a man's head is the wisdom he learns in applying his strength to situations in his life and learning how to win in those situations, right? So a newly married man stumbles into unnecessary arguments, right? Because he hadn't learned how to apply his strength yet, right? So he says stupid stuff to his wife and gets her upset and angry, right? He's stupid enough to answer the question, does this dress make me look fat? Yeah, I think you've gained some weight over the past month. He's stupid enough to answer those kind of questions, right? But a man who's learned some experience in applying his strength, he learns how to bob and weave a little bit. He learns how to slip a punch a little bit. He learns when to apply his strength and when not to apply his strength and kind of pull back a little bit. And so what we're talking about here is the idea of strength. Guys, that as you go through life and maybe you get a little more gray hair, hopefully it's wisdom as you're learning to be successful in leveraging your God-given strength to accomplish what you want to see and what God hopes to accomplish in your life, God's purpose in your life. Now, to be honest, for me, this was a hard concept to learn. By my personality, my nature, I'm the kind of person I like deep, loving relationships. I enjoy being around people and just having a good time. I do not like confrontation. I avoid conflict as much as possible. And so it's hard for me to try to find the balance of, being raised in a Christian home and being taught to be kind and respectful and all these things and, answer people, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and all these things. It was hard for me to find the balance of being loving but also strong. And I read a book one time called Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. And if you've never read that book, maybe you're not into reading books, make an exception for this one. I would encourage every man here to get that book and read it. And the reason it really impacted me was because it really set me free. I read this quote one day and it just spoke right to me. It said, "Let the world feel the weight of who you are and let them deal with it." I was constantly worried about how I could offend people by being outspoken or by expressing the strength God had given me. And when I read this quote, it set me free. It's not my responsibility to how other people react toward my strength. I am called to be strong. And if that offends some people, if that intimidates some people, well, that speaks more about who they are and not who I am. I am called to be strong. My wife needs me to be strong. My children need me to be strong. This church needs me to be strong. People in society, the vulnerable people in our society, need men who are strong, who are unafraid to speak up and have a voice and say, no. No, son, you're not doing that in my house. No, daughter, you're not wearing that to school. Get inside in your room and change your clothes. No. No, we are not tolerating people in our society telling our children that they are the wrong sex or the wrong gender. No. No. And I'm not ashamed to say that. And I'm not going to be talked out of it or back down or intimidated from it because I am a man. And God has created me to be strong. And if you don't like that, if that intimidates you, if you feel insecure about yourself being around me, that's your problem, not mine. And that set me free, that I have a responsibility to be who God has called me to be. And if people around me have a problem with it, well, they can deal with it. The old saying goes, they can get happy in the same pants they got mad in, right? And so that set me free to be who God had created me to be because God had called me to be strong. And men, this morning, I want you to hear me loud and clear. It is not your responsibility if people feel intimidated by your strength. It's not your fault if insecure people want to tear you down or stick the knife in you because they don't like the strength that is radiating out of who you are. That is a reflection of their own insecurities, their own condition of their heart. You are responsible for you to develop your own strength. And when I say strength, I want you to understand, I'm not talking necessarily about physical strength, even though that maybe is a physical reflection of what's going on in your heart. But what I'm talking about when I'm saying God has called a man to be strong is strength of character and strength of will. Now, what do I mean by strength of character? What I mean is that in this world we live in, our society employs a myriad of ways to seduce men from being strong. Think Samson and Delilah, if you know that story in the Bible. So when I'm talking about your strength being seduced, it seduces you to use your strength in unproductive ways. So young men whose highest goal in life is them and their buddies getting the highest score on Call of Duty. Like, how does that really affect anybody else around you? How are you making anybody you love, how are you making their life better if that's your highest goal in life, if that's what you live for? That you work to be on the weekends to go and play a video game and get the highest score with you and your buddies. See, that is a seduction of your strength that channels it into unproductive ways. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to step on some toes when I say this next example, but here we are. I'm being a man, all right? But guys, who cares if you bag the biggest buck in your hunting club and your wife feels like she's all alone in the struggle to raise your children because emotionally you're never there for her? What's it really matter if you get the biggest buck every year in your hunting club, but your wife is filing for a divorce? You've lost in what really matters. And what I want to teach you this morning is learning how to win in what really matters. And again, there's nothing wrong with playing video games, nothing wrong with hunting, nothing wrong with having hobbies and exercising, nothing wrong with any of those things. But when you do not allow them to have their proper role in your life, when you allow them to seduce you into channeling your strength into unproductive ways, you lose in the end. And so when I talk about strength of character, I mean that you understand how the enemy is trying to attack you, how he's trying to seduce your strength, put you to sleep, and like Samson, rob you of that strength and rob you of the blessings that rightfully belong to you and your family as you embrace your strength. He's trying to steal those things from you, and so you develop strength of character, where you say, I'm not letting those things run my life. I'm going to devote myself to cultivating my strength and putting it in the service of those I love. But the other also is strength of will. Or if you want to put another word on it, force of will. It is the determination to never give up. You know, they say in business that if you're going to have a successful business, you've got to be willing to fail 9 times in order to be successful on the 10th attempt. Because in the first 5 years of our young business, 9 out of 10 businesses fail. That's the odds. So in other words, you got to be willing to fail 9 times, go bankrupt 9 times, and pick yourself up off the mat, off the canvas, and say, here we go, and we go on another round. Let's go, sucker. And you re-engage in the fight, and you have a determination, I'm not taking no for an answer, and I'm going to push, and I'm going to make this thing happen. You have that kind of force of will, that force of determination, that strength that God has given a man, that I will not be denied, I will not be told no, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this thing work. And you take that approach to your marriage. You take that approach to your children. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure my wife has everything she needs to feel fulfilled in this relationship. I'm going to make sure my children have everything they need to have the best life I can give them. I'll work 2 jobs. I'll stay up late and study and go to school and get an extra degree or whatever it is. That you have that determination. I'm not backing down. I'm not giving up until I see this thing realized in my life. You know, there was a pastor I knew of. I didn't actually really meet him or know him personally, but a pastor I knew of who had one of the largest churches in the world, over 100,000 people down in South America. And I heard him tell a story. He said, he failed at pastoring a church, I think it was 11 times. Like, in other words, he opened a church, started a church, and the church didn't make it, and he closed the doors of the church 11 times. I don't know if I could have had that kind of determination, be like, maybe I'm in the wrong business here. I gotta go do something else here, sign up for another kind of job. But he stuck it out. He said, this is what God has called me to do. I'm going to make this happen. And on the 12th time it took off, and boom, it blew up and exploded. And at the time I knew of him, churches over 100,000 people. I mean, really just one of the largest churches in the world. But he had to pick himself up off the canvas 12 times after get knocked down and say, this fight ain't over. You're not knocking me out. I'm not taking no for an answer. And sometimes, guys, you got to have that kind of force or determination, that strength. I've used it in my ministry life sometimes where I've said, devil, you don't get a say in this conversation. God has given me this promise, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to push until it happens. Devil, I'm not taking no for an answer from you. And so whatever situation you may find, whatever problem you're against, having that force, that determination, that strength to say, I'm going to fight and I'm going to push until I see this promise realized. And let me just say to you, parents, as your children grow, don't overprotect your sons. Sometimes failure is the best teacher. And mamas, I know this is a hard lesson to learn because they'll always be your babies and you always want to protect them. But you can cripple a young man by doing too much for him. My son Sam has started working, and he was working at a job, and he wasn't happy with the way things are going, and his mama wasn't happy with the way things were going, and she's like, I'm going to go up there and talk to that boss. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm going to tell him I don't appreciate the way he's treating my son. I'm like, no, you're not. This is his job. He needs to learn to deal with his boss and have a good work ethic. And hey, sometimes you have jobs you don't like. And you got bosses who don't like you, and he needs to learn to sink or swim in that world as a man. If we go up there and we fight for him and make excuses for his poor work ethic or whatever else his boss may not like about him, we are crippling him. I don't want my son to be weak the rest of his life. I want him to be strong. And so I said, hey, if he gets fired from his job, he'll learn. And you have a family to support now, so it ain't that big of a deal, right? Make a minimum wage, work a few hours. It ain't like the world ends, Better he learn now than 40 years old and he walks off a job. I don't like the way the boss talked to me. He showed me the proper respect, And then his wife and kids are like, what are we going to do? We, can't pay the bill, Learn it now, right? And so this is such an important lesson that we teach our young men to cultivate strength because of our next point here, that guys, winning in your relationships, in your family particularly, requires you to lead. Winning requires you to lead. Now, again, when I'm talking about leading, I'm not talking about a controlling, domineering man who kind of has the attitude, this is my house, you're going to do what I say, woman, and, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about a man who brings his strength into a situation. He cultivates his strength, but then he gives it in service to the family that he loves and to other people in his life. He cultivates his strength, but it's meant to be given in service to people around him. So think of people like law enforcement or first responders or a soldier, right? You don't want a policeman knocking on your door saying, hey, you're running your electricity a little too much. Turn that AC up, You don't want him telling you, hey, you didn't cut your grass this week. If you don't cut your grass, I'm going to be back here to, bring you to jail. We don't want law enforcement, those who are strong and carry guns or can use violence. We don't want them that involved in our life, right? But it's nice when just their presence is there, right? We got some law enforcement live in my neighborhood, a few doors down, and some in the church live close to our house. And Nan always says, I like having them around, just living in our neighborhood. I know that if something happened in our house, they would be there in a minute or 2 minutes, instantly. We could just sit out in the yard and scream, and somebody could come running. They would be there instantly. It's just the presence that they bring that brings a sense of stability and safety and security. And guys, this is the role that God has called you to play in your family. See, David told Solomon, he said, act like a man. Or some translations there say, prove yourself a man. So you leverage the strength God has given you, you give it to those around you. If you ask a single mother, what is her number one prayer request? Every one of them will tell you, I want a man who will be a father to my children. Does she want a man who's going to go in there and tell her what shade of lipstick to wear or what color dress to wear that day? Of course not. She doesn't want a dominating man, but she wants a man who's going to be a consistent, steady presence in that home. Because when a man brings his strength to those situations, it changes the quality of the interactions that happen in the home. There's a pastor friend of mine who had preached a sermon about manhood, and he had this quote, and I wrote it down when I heard it. It was a great one, and I'm sharing it with you this morning. It says, a woman can only reach her potential when the man in her life is loving and strong. It's not a knock on you, ladies, okay? I'm not saying women are weak or anything like that. But I'm saying for a woman to reach her potential, whether it's a wife or a daughter, the man in her life, the husband or the father, must be both loving and strong. It's not enough just to be loving, guys. They need you to be strong. They need your presence and the presence of the strength that you bring into that situation. And when you bring that into that relationship, it allows them to flourish. And this is not just a preacher's opinion. Look at this here. Psalms 128, verses 1 to 3. How joyful are those who fear the Lord, all who follow his ways. You will enjoy the fruit of your labor. How joyful and prosperous you will be. So, guys, when you learn to live life God's way, you embrace the strength he's given you, you live out that role, then your life becomes prosperous and blessed in your relationships. Look at verse 3. Your wife will be like a fruitful grapevine flourishing within your home. Your children will be like vigorous young olive trees as they sit around your table. Now, most of us here don't make our living in agriculture, so sometimes these word pictures that are given to us in the Psalms, we don't quite understand what they're trying to say. So that line in verse 3, your wife will be like a fruitful grapevine flourishing within your home. The writer here, the author here, is trying to give you a picture of what a healthy marriage relationship is intended to be. Anybody here ever been to a vineyard? Ever seen a grapevine before? All right. Well, a grapevine requires a support system to grow and flourish. It's not a tree, like an oak tree, that can just grow up straight on its own. Anytime you go to a vineyard, the vines or grapevines are planted in rows, and there's always a post they're growing around, like most vines, and sometimes a crossbar on top, or maybe if it's a line of vines, it'll have like a wire stretched on that those vines grow up and around and through. He's giving you a mental picture of the roles of husbands and wives in a healthy marriage relationship. Guys, when you are that post, when you are consistent in your role, when you bring strength to your role as a husband and as a father, and you are consistent day in and day out, then your wife can entwine herself around you and become fruitful in the way that God always intended her to be. And if you've ever seen a plant that is a vine that does not have a support system, what does it do? It just collapses on the ground. It cannot reach its full potential without that support. And so, guys, when we bring our strength into the relationship, then it allows our wives to reach their full potential of who they are. And again, you talk to a single mother, and they're trying to be both father and mother to the children, and they're struggling, and they feel like they're not being good at either role because there's no support system there. And they're like the vine that collapses on the ground, and the fruit is eaten by animals that pass by, and, because the fruit is never born into full potential because there's no support system there. And the same is true in the family relationship, guys. God has given you your strength for you then to put it in the service of your family, to be that pillar that doesn't move. Because women, by design, and we'll talk more about this next week, ladies, but by design, God has made you more responsive to your surroundings. Because just as you can see God's purpose for a man through his physical body that God gave him, so you can see one of the ultimate purposes for a woman is in raising children. You're naturally better at it than us guys by the way God has designed you physically, mentally, emotionally. You're more in touch and responsive to the environment around you because you are the first line of protection for those children. But that also works against you because in the world around you, sometimes it can cause chaos in your life. And men, we have to be that support structure that then she can entwine herself around, that when the storms of life comes, it doesn't blow her away. It doesn't overwhelm her. And so our presence there, not dominating, not controlling, but simply our presence of being who God made us to be and being there in our lives as a strong man brings stability and abundance of love and peace and order to our home. You guys with me? And then it says, your children be like vigorous young olive trees as they sit around your table. Anybody here ever planted a young tree in your yard? Yep. You put the tree in the ground, but what also do you put in the ground next to it? A stake, right? Again, a support system. Because young trees will be moved by the environment around them. They can be moved by the wind much more easily. They have a tendency to move toward the sun, and so they won't grow straight. They will grow one way or another depending on where the sun rises in their environment. And so if you want a beautiful, strong tree, straight tree with a straight trunk, you have to have a support system around it when it's young. Are you seeing the picture of a man's role with children? God has given you your string so that you become that support system for your children so they grow to be strong and straight and accomplish God's purpose for their life. So let me give you an example. I got 2 teenagers in the home, and every now and then they think they know more than their mother. And they have a tendency to kind of want to mouth off to her. And that is when I step in and apply my strength in this situation, because that is a line you are not allowed to cross in my home. That's my wife you're talking to, son. And you do not have the right to disrespect her. You may be right and she may be wrong, but you do not have the right to raise your voice to my wife. And I've told my teenage son on a number of occasions, son, I will take you in the back room and tear your butt up. Do you hear me? You are not allowed to talk to your mother that way. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. See, he immediately backs off and backs down when I apply my strength to the situation. See, because I'm being that stake, that support system for him, because he needs to learn there's something sacred about a woman. And just because you're stronger doesn't mean you get to dominate her. Just because you may be stronger than her physically or have a stronger force of will doesn't mean you get to intimidate her. Your strength is given to you to protect her. Your strength is given to you to value her. And when you apply your strength to a woman in that way, then she can flourish and become the fruitful grapevine that God intended for her to be. She reaches her full potential. So see, I'm that stake that is making my son, helping my son grow strong and straight and become a productive, strong man in his family, future family, and in society eventually one day. You guys with me? There's a deeper truth here with olive trees. The land of Israel is found in the Middle East where there's a lot of desert, hot, arid climate. Olive trees are known for their fruit, olives, that they produce as they grow, but also the shade they create as they mature. This is a picture, mom and dad, of your relationship with your children when they grow into adults and you grow into old age. That if you provide, guys, we provide that support for our children, we teach them what it means to grow strong and straight, then when they are mature and we are older, their lives provide a shade, a comfort for us. Plain English, they take care of you in your old age. You see the picture here. So you are the stake in the ground where they're young, and you teach them things like honor. You teach them there are sacred things to life. You teach them, young men, how to be strong, but learn to apply their strength through gentleness and love, and when to be strong and when to back off. And as they go through life, you're coaching, you're guiding them until they grow into that strong, mature tree that is a blessing to you. You eat the fruit of it in your old age, and their shade of who they have grown to become provides comfort for you. You can look at that son or that daughter and say, I did a good job with them. That's a son or daughter to be proud of right there. See the picture? He's painting for you. And so, guys, that really is on us to be that support system. So a man's strength has no meaning until it's given in the service of others. Again, think of first responders, those in the military that we honor, men who give their strength, the best years of their life to defend our country, our families, our freedom. And we honor them for that. And we should. They could be pursuing their own pleasure. They could be working jobs, making a whole lot more money, but they sacrifice and they give their strength in the service of those they love. And because they do, they're worthy of honor. Their strength takes on a deeper, higher purpose and meaning because it's given in service to those around them. And the same is true with you guys. Your strength God has given you takes on a deeper purpose and meaning when you give it in service to those around you. And I hope, guys, as you grow in your strength and reach your potential in who God's called you to be, you're going to begin giving it in service to more than just your family around you. You know, a good man is a man who takes responsibility for himself. And, you know, if you've ever listened to a guy like Jordan Peterson or something, he talks about, getting up, making your bed and, going to work. Don't like you just, like you rolled out of bed, but actually comb your hair and dress nice. And, you want respect from other people, dress like you deserve their respect and, all these kind of things. And that's great advice for young guys. You're not married yet, single guys. Like, learn to cultivate strength by learning to cultivate some good habits in your life. Dress for success and, learn good financial principles and all these different things. But a great man, so a good man is defined by taking responsibility for himself. A great man is defined by the level of responsibility he carries for others. We think of the great men in our history of our nation, guys like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, who took our country basically on their back and willed it to victory against all odds, in the midst of chaotic situations. Didn't care what anybody else said or thought about them. Didn't care if even most people thought they were wrong. But just out of the strength that they had, they willed our nation into victory, moved us forward into the future that God had for our nation. And this is what I'm talking about here. Because ultimately, guys, the measure of a man is defined or measured in the level of responsibility that he carries. And we all know guys who can, are gym rats and, can bench press 300 pounds or whatever, but have children with multiple women and don't take any kind of real responsibility for any of them. Physical strength is not the measure of a man. The measure of a man is his level of responsibility. A good man takes responsibility for himself. A great man takes responsibility for those around him. And there's a beautiful story in the Bible. You may have read it before in the book of Ruth. Ruth, the main character, is a foreigner living in the land of Israel, and basically she's surviving on welfare. I mean, basically that's what it is, what they considered welfare at that time, where rich people who own property and fields would not harvest all of their field, but would leave kind of the fringe areas for poor people to come and harvest that fruit or that wheat or whatever it is, and that was what they lived on. That was kind of welfare in their society. And so she's harvesting in this rich man's field who happens to be single. His name is Boaz. And there's this beautiful scene in the Bible where it's harvest season, and the workers are all staying all night in the fields because they got to get up early in the morning and continue working all day while there's sunlight. So they're sleeping out in the fields or in the barns. And Boaz is out there with them. And Ruth comes to him in the middle of the night, not in a sexual, I'm going to sleep with you way, but simply lays at his feet. And she takes the blanket that he's using and pulls it over herself. And of course, Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night. He starts getting cold. Where'd the blanket go? He wakes up in the middle of the night and he sees this woman laying at his feet. And he finds out it's Ruth. And of course, he's met her in the course of business in the fields. And she says to him, "Spread your blanket over me." And he understood what that meant. That was not, again, a sexual thing. That was, she's asking him to take responsibility for her. And of course, there's a beautiful scene there. He says yes, and then he goes the next day and does all the preparations and eventually marries her, and she's an ancestor of King David and eventually an ancestor of Jesus. And it's a beautiful story in the Bible, but it's a picture, guys, of what it means to rise to your potential as a man. That the strength God has given you not just for yourself, but to put in service of those around you. And as you grow in potential as a man, you spread your blanket, so to speak. You take responsibility for your wife that God has given you. Take responsibility for the children God has given you. But as you reach your full potential as a man, you begin taking responsibility for people outside of that, your immediately family circle. Right? So we start using our strength and we start speaking up and saying, no, we're not allowing you to teach that nonsense in our schools around here. I don't care if it's not politically correct. I don't care if somebody screams at the moon and rages and howls about it. I don't care. I'm a man. I'm strong. Deal with it. And when we begin doing that as men in society, then we see people who are wicked people start falling back. The problems we have in our society is because there are men who have been seduced or talked out of or intimidated from using their strength. And it is our responsibility, guys. God is calling us to embrace our strength and to use it to spread our blanket, as it will, over people around us. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. I don't have time to get into all that today. I'm already over my time limit already. Let me wrap up with this. Winning requires you to know your strength. God has called you to be strong, guys. God has called you to give that strength and service to those around you. But you must know your strength. And what I mean by that is you need to know the source of your strength. See, David told Solomon, walk in obedience to him, that is God, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go. There is a strength that comes from your relationship with God that will carry you through the dark times of life. Because no matter how strong we are, guys, we're all human. We're all tempted to give in to our weaknesses. We're all tempted to back down when others are trying to bully us or intimidate us. We all are human and can be tempted in that way. And it's in those moments when you cultivate your strength out of your relationship with God that there is that strength that comes only from God that rises up in you and says, no, we're not doing that. No, I'm not going to back down. No, I'm going to step forward and do what I've been called to do and who God has called me to be. A final word, and this is our final word, last scripture today. A final word, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. As you cultivate and deepen your relationship with God, the roots of who you are, go down deep in your relationship with God, God will empower you guys to play the role God's called you to play. In your relationship with your wife, in your relationship with your children, and eventually reaching your full potential as a man who takes responsibility for those around you. This morning, if you're here and you say, Pastor, I don't know the Lord the way you're talking about. I'm not pursuing his purpose and view of manhood for my life, then I want to give you the opportunity to do that this morning. Say this simple prayer with us. God will hear you. He'll forgive you your sins, and you can be living life his way today, a life of peace, a life of purpose that God always intended for you. Let's bow our heads. Repeat after me. Say, Lord Jesus, I believe in you. Be my Lord and Savior. I'll obey and follow you. Amen. You prayed that prayer for the first time, or maybe the first time in a long time. God's heard you. You're now a child of God. Let's give them a hand this morning. We welcome you into God's family. Please take a moment and fill out that connection card on the back of the seat in front of you. Promise you we're not going to call you and harass you. We just want to know who you are and how we can help you get connected to the life of our church. Amen. I want you to welcome Jocelyn to the stage. She comes with some